I was looking at my computer screen when she entered the apartment. She had been coming home from work late for a long time. Today was no different from the others. It was almost 10 swine, the children, and I had already had dinner and done our homework. They had been lying in bed for almost an hour. They didn't even ask about Mom or why she wasn't home. This was just recently, and it saddened me. I've spent the last hour going over our finances. Over the past 2 years, the situation has deteriorated sharply. Our income decreased significantly, but my wife did not notice this. She still spent money freely, as if we didn't care about anything. I just finished paying my last bills. We might be able to hold out for another couple of months. I also revised my life plan. Perhaps I made a mistake. For the past 2 years, I've been staring at a time bomb, wondering if it will ever explode. I always figured it would happen at some point, but I started to doubt it. I don't know how long she stood and looked at me. Lately, I've been getting lost in my own thoughts more and more often. Losing time was a byproduct. Finally, with her arms crossed and an all too familiar look of contempt on her face, she spoke. "Michael, I want a divorce." I'm not sure what feelings I had at that moment. My spirit was so loaded with doubt and self-loathing that I was almost numb to any new emotions. Actually, it wasn't all that funny, but I still tried to suppress my laughter. My wife of 17 years just told me that it's over between us, that everything we've built together will eventually be torn apart. I haven't felt this kind of emotion in a long time, and it almost made me smile, relief. I looked at her for just a moment, allowing myself to be transported one last time to our happier times. Then I came back to reality. Fine, I was a better programmer than manager. Unfortunately, programmers are promoted to project managers, then to department heads, and then to senior management. That's how I ended up as a senior product development manager. It was just a fancy title for a salesman. In fact, I was the most qualified for the position at the time. I created our flagship product line almost single-handedly. I nursed her through her infancy, helped her grow through 6 successive upgrades. I knew our product better than anyone. When clients had questions, I had answers. When our employees had problems, I knew how to solve them. Add in a new haircut and an overpriced suit, and I looked the part. The salary increase and benefits that I received in connection with my promotion did not cause any complaints from me. I would say I was mostly happy with my job, but I loved programming and missed it a lot. In my position, I did not have the opportunity to do this. There were simply too many meetings and phone calls to have the luxury of going back to lines of code. I was forced to watch a new batch of young, bright-eyed guys who were trying to outdo each other with their latest developments. I won't lie, being the boss was worth it, but I always wanted my job responsibilities to be a little different. It was no surprise when I was fired from Chicago Technology Solutions. If I were the boss, I would do the exact same thing. My attendance at meetings has been sporadic at best, and too many deadlines have been missed. At that time, I did not try to get fired, but I didn't really make any attempt to keep my job at CTS. I was depressed for a long time. It took me almost 3 months to get out of my initial depression and try to move on. But this was not crowned with success either. It took me another month to find a way out of the predicament I found myself in, at least one I could live with. I think I would go crazy if I didn't have children. They had a flawless routine that helped me get my life back on a positive track. Breakfast, school, snacks, homework, dinner, and sleep. Breakfast, school, snack, homework, dinner, bed. This was my mantra, and it helped me find my way. I threw myself into my work as a stay-at-home dad. I took over all the housework and taxi duties. The children sincerely rejoiced at my presence in the house. It made me realize that I have some value. I wasn't completely worthless. If my wife sensed these changes in our family dynamic, she never spoke about it. I'm pretty sure she didn't even notice. I met Jennifer Riley at a frat party. I almost decided not to go. I joined the fraternity for the doors it would open after high school, not to attend parties while I was in college. I decided that I would need all the help I could get. My grades were excellent, so it wasn't a concern. However, everything else about me was just average. Height, weight, appearance, character, average. My name, Michael, was the most popular name from 1961 to 1988, completely average. To be honest, when I was away from the computer, there was nothing so unique about me. Dates, I had several. Relationship, well, not much. I was pretty good at keeping myself company, even in my senior year of college, until I saw Jennifer Riley. Jennifer was almost as ordinary as I was. I realized that the average woman looks much better. She was a little withdrawn. I watched her for quite some time before I plucked up the courage to speak to her. Our first meeting was short and quiet, but the acquaintance took place. Over the next few weeks, we met for coffee and studied in the library together. We talked for almost 2 months before our first real date. From that moment on, the most fantastic time in my life began. 15 years of bliss. Our courtship was short and our engagement even shorter. Shortly after graduating, we got married and moved into our first apartment in Chicago. We took the morning and evening train to and from our first job. We barely made ends meet, but we were together. We had almost everything in common. Family stories, dating experiences, common interests and goals. Where we did not coincide, we merged. If I couldn't do something, Jennifer did it. If she had a flaw, it was one of my strengths. I managed our shared finances better. Jennifer was better able to manage our social and family schedules. We worked together and our lives began to improve quickly. Over the next few years, we were both promoted several times. Our group of friends has expanded significantly. We were able to save money to buy our first home, as well as travel and have fun. Our sex life started out just like our relationship, slowly. We've been holding hands and kissing since our first date. We switched to active petting when we realized that we had an exclusive relationship. Our virginity lasted until the night of our engagement. Since then, our passion has grown along with our shared success. Jennifer quit her job 8 years later when our son Jacob was born. A little over a year later, our daughter Emily was born. Yes, I know their names were the most popular when they were born. It was kind of a family tradition. We bought a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs with room for a dog. We bought a family sedan and a minivan. In general, our life was going well. 2 children, a pet, a house, and 2 cars. Totally average. I didn't think I could be happier. I was wrong. My promotion to manager happened shortly after Emily's first birthday. It was almost like a reward for the years of being ignored as one of the middle class and not complaining. Like I said, my new salary was unremarkable and we weren't complaining. I had a flexible schedule and worked from home most days, coming into the office for staff and management meetings. They say that money can't buy happiness. I believe this is true, but what you can buy is stylish clothes and grooming, better medical care, a new home in a better area, and self-confidence. I went from average to slightly above average. My wife went from average, which I thought was beautiful, to slightly above average, which I thought was damn sexy. Our sex life, which I had always considered good, reached a new level. We traveled more and were able to spend time with our children while saving more and more money for retirement. When Emily started elementary school, Jennifer decided she wanted to go back to work part-time. She quickly found a job she thought she would enjoy at a startup marketing firm. She went to the office when she took the children to school. She would end her day when it was time to pick them up. This was the icing on the cake. We didn't need her salary, so we were able to save it. My projection is that by the time the kids graduate from college, we will be able to retire and live very comfortably. I found out that my wife was cheating on me by accident 3 months before our 15th wedding anniversary. It was my birthday. In fact, I found evidence 2 days before my birthday. I just didn't know it. It took me a few weeks to put everything together. I overlooked the fact that my wife wanted to take a more active role in her new job. This meant she would have to work a few more hours a week, and I would have to pick up the kids from school. But it didn't affect my schedule at all, and I was glad about that. When after about 3 months I noticed that she was often distracted, I asked her about it. She replied that she was trying to find herself in the office and was a little stressed. I decided to take on more responsibilities around the house to lighten her load a little. When our passionate sex life began to noticeably decline, we talked about it. She said she was getting old and didn't need as much as she used to. Our sex life picked up steam for a few weeks, but then faded away again. I didn't dare talk about it again for fear of a quarrel. I was almost at my breaking point when I discovered the gift. The weather had cooled considerably, and I was looking for one of my sweaters. I took on the duties of a laundress, and more than once got confused about which closet my clothes should be put in. I was sorting through sweaters on the shelf of her closet when I saw it behind some old shoe boxes. It was hard not to notice him. The pink box and white ribbon from the lingerie store were unmistakable. The card addressed to my beloved one excited me. A small war of thoughts flared up in my head for a moment. Should I watch? Should I wait? I decided to take a look. I wasn't sure I could wait until my birthday to rape my wife after reading the card. Please forgive the packaging this gift came in. You can unwrap the real gift on your birthday when I wear what's in the box. Love, Jennifer. I was excited and excited at the same time. Over the next 48 hours, I stepped up my game. I made sure to meet her at the door with flowers, give her a foot massage, and cook her favorite dinner. Her reaction was not what I expected. It looked like she was tolerating my affection. On my birthday, I made sure the kids finished their homework early. I didn't want any problems to interfere with my gift. I was a little surprised when Jennifer came home late from work. I was even more confused when she asked me what was for dinner. But I was ready to play along to my surprise. I said we should go eat pizza. The children had fun, and we went. I made an arrangement with the waitress, and just before leaving, the waiter Serena did me with happy birthday. I thought I saw surprise in my wife's eyes, but she quickly recovered. I'll give you your gift later, Michael, she said, smiling. The road home was stressful for me. I almost had an accident. The 15 minutes while the kids got ready for bed was brutal. But the 15 minutes after that, while they fell asleep, was excruciating. Luckily, Jennifer returned from an emergency trip to the store to buy milk shortly after they fell asleep. When I arrived at the bedroom door, Jennifer was not in the room. I sat down on the bed. A few moments later, she emerged from the bathroom wearing a flannel nightgown, no makeup on her face, and her hair in a ponytail. By this point, I was starting to get a little disillusioned with the games. When will I receive my gift? She slid into bed and crawled under the covers. She reached over to turn off the bedroom lamp, but stopped. Oops, I almost forgot. She opened a drawer on her nightstand and pulled out a small square box wrapped in the colorful balloon paper we had used for Michael's last birthday and handed it to me. Happy birthday, honey. And that was all. She rolled over, turned off the light, and fell asleep. I was too shocked to even open her gift. The next day, my depression began in full force. I replayed the events of the day over and over again in my head and could not understand what I had done that had so clearly ruined our evening. I was completely confused. I remained in despair for almost 2 weeks. This damn gift almost flashed a pink light at me, announcing my failure. I've heard all these cliches. The husband will be the last to know, etc. I have to be honest and say that I was truly in the dark. The idea of Jennifer cheating on me was so foreign that I never, not once, thought it was possible. But that was the first thing that came to my mind when she called home 13 days after my birthday and said that she would be home late. It's Alan's 30th birthday, and his staff is inviting him to a celebration. I might be late. I don't remember answering her or going to the closet in the bedroom. But I do remember looking at the empty space where my gift once stood. For longer than I care to admit, I thought I might be having a heart attack. And for a few moments, I hoped it was true and that I would die soon. Alan Henderson was Jennifer's boss, a smarmy, arrogant advertising executive who was several years younger than both Jennifer and me. I only met him once, but I remember not liking him very much, mainly because he seemed so insincere when he spoke. Emily brought me to my senses. Are you okay, Dad? A few seconds passed before my eyes focused on my daughter, who was hovering over me on the verge of tears. I'm fine, honey. Dad just ate something his stomach didn't like. I'll be out in a minute. I just need to get myself in order. I did eventually get out of the bathroom, although I don't remember much after that. I remember grabbing my dusty bottle of scotch. Judging by the headache the next morning, I knew I had had several glasses. I had no idea when Jennifer came home. When I found her in the kitchen this morning, feeding the children, she didn't look like anything unusual had happened. She was just going about her normal business. and only the slight shudder that I saw on her face when she sat down to eat killed all the remaining love in me. It was very subtle, but it was there. I would like to write about how I stood up to my cheating bitch wife, but I didn't. I was simply devastated. It was all I could do to move on. And for several weeks, I didn't get better. I was like a zombie. Every day when I realized that my wife was calmly doing household chores, I felt worse and worse. I thought I hit rock bottom. It took me the weekend of my 15th wedding anniversary to shake myself up and decide to take action. I probably wouldn't have done anything. I acted like a weakling. I knew it. I wish I could say I was shocked. There is probably some technical psychological terminology for my behavior. If my father were alive, he would simply say that I acted like a weakling. He would be right. It wasn't until my wife announced that she had to go to a work conference that the fog cleared from my thoughts. She won't be around for our anniversary. I don't know why this mattered to me. It was just another level of disrespect. But it hurt, mostly because she gave no indication that she even knew about the date. After drinking myself into oblivion on the night of our anniversary, I woke up angry. I've reached my limit. I called my lawyer and made an appointment. I was going to end this farce. I was sure that my life couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. The take no prisoners attitude with which I walked into the lawyer's office gave way to crushing disbelief. I knew divorce could be difficult. I thought cheating on my wife would work in my favor. Instead, my lawyer punched hole after hole in my case. I had no evidence of cheating. If I had proof, it wouldn't matter. My wife would have the right to divide our property 50-50. I had no evidence that my wife was a bad parent. My best hope would be joint custody. The difference in income also worked in my wife's favor. I would pay spousal support and alimony. Most likely, my wife would get primary custody and the right to remain in the house for the benefit of the children. My wife was a cheater, and I was a buffoon. I went from depressed to upset. My wife even asked me about it a few weeks later. "You really don't look good, Michael. Is something bothering you?" "No, darling." At least she pretended to care. And I just wandered through life. Then I was fired. I didn't know it then, but it was the best thing that happened to me. The evening news gave me a glimmer of hope. I watched depressing story after depressing story, and it seemed to fit my mood perfectly. But then this happened. A major employer on the East Coast went bankrupt. Former employees were struggling to get their final paycheck and were worried about their pensions. It seemed to me that some people might be in a worse situation than me. Then the talking head appeared on the screen again with its analysis. The employees will likely win the lawsuit against their former employer, but it will not make a difference. Nothing left. All the money's gone. It didn't take me long to connect the dots and come up with a plan of action. My wife couldn't take what wasn't there. We wouldn't have anything, so we wouldn't share anything. Of course, at the same time I was screwing myself up, but I was still going to lose half of did I really care about the rest? My plan started out simple enough. I was unemployed and had no intention of looking for a job. I was going to spend our savings until there was nothing left. I admit it was a crazy idea. I didn't even think it would work, but it was something I could grab onto. 2 years is a long time. I was painfully bored when I was alone, which was almost always. I realized that Jennifer truly was the lifeblood of our friend group. When she distanced herself from me, I discovered that I didn't have any truly strong friendships. I was an only child. Both my parents died young, my dad from a heart attack, my mom from cancer. I was really alone. For 2 years, my children were the only thing that was right in my life. I enrolled in the executive MBA program. The university was expensive, but local. In one go, I spent almost $120,000. I paid cash for a new luxury SUV, $60,000 minus. I fully funded my kids' education savings account. This cost another $260,000. I spent thousands on a new wardrobe and began withdrawing more and more cash twice a week. I took the kids to school, went to the bank, and drove to the lake shore. I never gambled with the money I took with me. A few bucks here and there to keep yourself entertained. I spent enough to show that I spent the day at the casino, including receipts for lunch, snacks, and parking. The main amount went into a wall safe in our garage, my personal post-divorce war chest in case things go south. My other expensive purchase: complete private surveillance of my wife and her lover. I asked for everything I needed: videos, photographs, daily diary of events. I'm embarrassed to say how much it cost me. You're probably wondering if my wife has noticed any of my spending. I'd say yes, except for the gambling part. I had to tell her about transferring money to the children because I needed her signature on the guardian accounts. She saw my car and clothes. She never said anything about them. I'm sure she thought I was working and that we were still living on an easy street. She also made a few purchases, but I didn't say a word. I've often wondered who benefits from her increased lingerie purchases. It's just that we never discussed this topic. We were cordial with each other and communicated daily. It was like putting up with a roommate we didn't particularly like. Sex? Don't even go there. Time spent with children was the highlight of my life. I did my best to support whatever interest they had. We did homework and played games together. We went to parks, rode bikes, and went to the movies. Since I took on the role of home cook, they seemed interested in helping me. I found some simple recipes and let them do it. Jennifer was usually around at some point during the week. I didn't exclude her from our family activities, but I didn't make any effort to involve her either. If she was there and wanted to participate, she just did it without saying a word. I received a weekly report about my wife's activities. I thought she was just having sex with her boss, but in reality it was a few guys from her office. A few months later, the company's clients were on its dance map. It was painful, not good. She has already fallen in my eyes. The fact that I now had proof did not move me at all. It wasn't a very interesting sight. In a way, it made me feel better, but not much. It was clear that Alan Henderson was not a very skilled lover, although he had the ability to distribute gifts to himself among several different women. This surprised me a little. I assumed, based on her gift, that there was some kind of relationship between him and my wife, but in reality they were more like sex buddies. It was the same with most of the other 6 men who had fun with my wife. After about a year, it dawned on me that I hadn't had sex since I started my journey. It didn't bother me much. It was just another addition to my wonderful existence. I stopped monitoring after a year. I'd seen enough, and it felt more like a chore to look through the junk they sent me. Despite classes, children, and gambling, I had a lot of free time. So I decided to focus on my life after marriage, which I assumed would happen someday. I started a new exercise regimen. I've always been in decent shape, nothing special, of course, but during this time, I achieved good results in the bench press and running endurance. I believe that huge muscles and good looks are mostly genetics, and I clearly didn't fit into either of those categories. However, personally, I was very happy with the way I looked. I started researching the latest news about my former industry. I realized that at some point I would need a job. A year away from the madness has left me far behind than I thought. I spent several hours every day learning the latest technologies and software packages. I took a special interest in my old company, CTS. They seemed to be stagnant. They definitely weren't losing market share. Their revenues were stable, but they weren't gaining traction. In the technology business, if you stand still, you lose. I also spent a significant amount of time studying divorce. I've spent some time devising new devious plans to ruin the life of my hopefully soon-to-be ex-wife. However, most of my time was spent studying how divorce affects children. I had already gone through most of my pain, and my children were a big part of that. I wanted to make sure that when their transition came, I would be fully prepared. There is a huge amount of information out there that I thought was complete nonsense. 8 months into my adventure, I started to panic. My wife began to come home at the usual time, and she started talking to me and asking how my day was. Of course, I answered abruptly, but that didn't bother her. She began to dress more provocatively for bed. It seemed like she was trying to rekindle the intimacy of our old life. A few weeks later, things got even worse. For a year and a half, she did not take part in our lives and minded her own business. Now she complained about the lack of communication. She started talking about working on our marriage, and I stopped talking to her. Complete silence. Her attempts at reconciliation continued until her birthday. I left her gift on the dining table. The wrapping paper must have looked familiar since I used it from the last gift she gave me. The content shouldn't have been a surprise either. It took me 6 months to open the last birthday gift I received from my wife. It was a watch with a cheap digital dial. When I spotted my birthday gift in the impulse buy section of our neighborhood convenience store, I was very angry. $995 watch from a fast trade store, the best wife. Then I saw that they had a suitable women's model. I've come to terms with this. I bought them and waited 18 months to give them to her. I wish I could have seen her reaction, but alas, I wasn't there when she opened it. The kids and I had a movie night and got home quite late. The next day she left before the kids, and I even got up. Suddenly, everything returned to normal. Jennifer began to stay at the office later and later. We hardly spoke when she was at home, and now finally it happened. Michael, I want a divorce. I hoped she would get it over with quickly, but almost a week passed before I was given her statement. It was almost laughable. Spousal and child support, unequal distribution of assets in her favor, mental and emotional cruelty listed as relevant factors. I decided to give her until next Monday and took the kids camping. I didn't want them around because I would release the hounds. We returned 6 days later, rested and refreshed. Jennifer was waiting for us at home. She was sitting alone in the living room. I think she might have the stomach flu. In any case, she didn't look well. I was wondering which part was the biggest surprise for me. I filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery. I asked for a house, the only real property we had left, and full custody of the children. I asked for spousal and child support because I was unemployed and taking care of children full time for 2 years. I filed alienation of affection lawsuits against 7 of Jennifer's sexual partners. I had no illusions that I would win any of them. But the law in Illinois allowed it, so I returned in arms. I filed civil lawsuits against her employer and the companies of 3 clients who took advantage of my wife. Again, I didn't think I could win, but bad publicity might work in my favor. Finally, I sent Jennifer's greatest hits DVD to her parents and best friend, so she knew I wouldn't be afraid to use it. She must have known about the evidence I had against her. All this was stated in my counterclaim, but I did not want to take any risks. The children had a snack and went to their rooms to get ready for bed. They didn't pay attention to their mother. She made no move to address them. I went to the refrigerator to get a beer. Then I walked into the living room and sat down in the chair opposite Jennifer. She didn't look at me for a long time, so I just enjoyed my beer. Besides the fact that she felt bad, she seemed to be crying about something. Maybe she was injured. She finally spoke, but it was almost a whisper. "You will destroy me." I waited for her to look up so I could follow her gaze as I answered. It took a few seconds. God, I hope so. I thought this moment would be more intense. When a single tear formed in her eye and then rolled down her cheek, I felt nothing. "Do you hate me that much?" "Oh, no, Jennifer, I don't hate you. Hate takes effort. I can honestly say that I put in absolutely no effort when it comes to you. All my efforts go into taking care of me and my children, but I'm your wife. Stop. I won't let a piece of shit like you ruin my wife's good name. My wife was a loving and caring woman. My best friend, partner, and mother to my children. She is dead. You are the slut who has taken over her body. Don't talk like you have anything to do with me." It took a long time before she spoke again. "What should I do now? Is this a rhetoric call question, or do you really want to hear my answer?" I didn't let her answer before continuing. "I believe there are several possible solutions to your problem. You can go far, far away and try to start a new life. I would choose this option. I will never allow my children to spend any meaningful time with you. So this should not influence your decision to leave. Or I guess you could try staying here, hanging around the city, trying to control myself. But who knows who will hear about your little exploits, or who will want to hire a slut like you? Maybe you can settle down with some loser who doesn't care what you are. But what kind of nonentity will this be? Or you can commit suicide. I really hope you don't choose this option. This will prevent me from watching you suffer. But then again, I'm not sure my opinion really matters to you. It definitely didn't matter when you decided to cheat on me with your boss. I've been dreaming about giving this little speech for months. I should have been glad to be able to say it. As I watched what was left of her spirit crumble, word by word, I hoped that I would get some kind of satisfaction. Instead, I just felt empty. Life after the divorce was mixed. With the lawsuits, I was doing much better than I had hoped. I received just over $1 million in settlements from 3 companies whose employees slept with my wife. It was surprising because my lawyer told me not to expect much. During the after-game analysis, we decided that after seeing how he handled my ex-wife's company, they didn't want any of the negative publicity. We destroyed my ex-wife's company through discovery motions, depositions, and leaks to the press. I also started my own stealth campaign, emailing the CEOs of their remaining clients with information about my wife, her boss, and their buddies. It took time, but gradually their income dried up. Employees who did not want to be associated with the scandal quit. Eventually, they filed for bankruptcy. Alan Henderson was fired and left town in disgrace. The $200,000 check I received was smaller than my other victories, but much nicer. I received nothing from my alienation of affection claims. I never thought I would get it. 4 wives nevertheless brought their husbands to light in subsequent divorces. It wasn't all champagne and roses. In the process, I also hurt myself. It was not uncommon for me to run into someone familiar with my situation. For a while, the ridicule and teasing got out of control. I don't know if it was fortunate or unfortunate, but I didn't care. I already felt like a failure, so anyone's words didn't touch me. Some of these bastards were actually pretty smart. I was able to protect my children from most of the collateral damage. This has always been my main concern. They were sad for a while, but soon recovered. The biggest victory was my return to CTS as Vice President of Design and Development. One way to escape from personal troubles was to return to programming. Over the course of 2 dismal years, I was able to develop an add-on to the main CTS software that allowed it to be easily integrated with 2 other popular competitor software packages. I founded my own company and started selling my development. Less than a year later, I received offers from all 3 companies to buy my company and my software. I received $11 million from my company and an incredible compensation package from CTS. I had been considering retirement for some time, but with no social life at all, I was convinced that if I didn't give myself a reason to get out of the house every day, I would become a recluse. My new income allowed me to hire a sweet little old lady who worked part-time as a housekeeper and nanny for the children. A year later, Mrs. Marlene Jensen moved in full-time, living in the apartment above the garage of our new home. She was like a grandmother to my children, mostly sweet and kind, but strict when necessary. What I valued most was the advice she could give to children, the advice that only comes with experience. I loved my children and did my best to be a caring and attentive father, but I was also damaged, scarred, and cruel. I also turned to her for advice. She was my rock when it came time to make decisions. The children grew into well-adjusted adults, and I saw them and their families from time to time. Unfortunately, over time, our closeness weakened. I was in no way offended by them. It was better to keep me at a distance so that my bitterness would not infect their lives. Mrs. Jensen worked for me until the kids left for college. Then she retired. I offered her free room and board as a pension. She was a constant presence in my life for 15 years. She tried her best to get me to live again and find someone to share my life with. I appreciated her efforts, but in the end, she died knowing that I would always be alone. I never really opened up to anyone again. My friendships were superficial and unfulfilling. I've never been on a date except for a few group dinners organized by casual friends. I have a well-deserved reputation for being an icy-hearted, merciless person who cannot be contradicted. For the most part, I was avoided, and I blamed no one but myself for it. My sexual needs were regulated quite well. My ever-growing wealth allowed me to maintain a constant rotation of call girls. I paid generously for their time and the use of their bodies. Basically, I just had sex with them and sent him out the door. I really liked one of them. Her name was Candy. I later found out that it was in fact Mary Beth. She was a passionate and willing partner. I think I was more than a client to her too. But I could never burden anyone else with my demons. So when I felt she was getting too attached to me, I let her go. If you're wondering what happened to Jennifer, she had a hard life. She tried to talk to me for almost a year. I don't know exactly why she tried. Did she think we could reconcile, or did she hope for a relationship with my children? Maybe. I honestly warned her, but she didn't listen. She tried to stay in Chicago, and I started following her. When she applied for a job, I made sure her work record was always there to greet her. When she started dating, which happened almost immediately, I sent her potential partners packages with wishes so that they knew everything about the woman they were letting into their lives. I didn't care if they wanted to keep her around after they found out the truth, but I didn't want her to be able to reshape history by ignoring it. I had to live with this every day, so it was only fair that she did too. As I said, my ex-wife continued a constant campaign of unanswered phone calls, emails that I never read or responded to, and always kept my email inbox full. I think sick part of me wanted her to suffer. I believed that at the very beginning it would be appropriate to seek professional help. Perhaps it would save part of my soul and allow me to return to a normal life. But in the end, I never went. And as time passed, it seemed too late to do anything. I could have changed my phone number, but I didn't. An assistant could sort my mail, but I always did it myself. I could block her incoming emails. This would prevent me from accidentally opening one of them. It was a stream of apologies that meant nothing. Of course, the situation got out of control. Of course, she always loved me. Hasn't she suffered enough? I responded with a gift and a simple note. I bought the sluttiest lingerie I could find at her favorite store and wrapped it neatly in a clean white ribbon that really brought out the pink color of the box. I have attached a beautiful handwritten note. I'm sure she appreciated the symmetry when she opened the card addressed to the bitch. One of her potential suitors tried to bring me to justice for tormenting my ex-wife. He showed up on my doorstep, full of liquid courage, pushing me back and knocking me over as I opened the front door. It was his mistake. Like I said, I'm nothing special. I didn't do any martial arts or special forces training. I was an ordinary guy. I've never been a violent person. Hell, I've never even been in a fight. But what I had was rage, undiluted, unspent hatred for my wife and her lovers. He was the unfortunate recipient of my exit. In the end, I escaped with a good burn and a broken rib. He was lucky to be alive. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and trespassing and received probation as a first-time offender. I think the years of reconstructive surgery and rehabilitation made a greater impression on him. Jennifer never tried to contact me again. I stopped following her after another year when she found a full-time job cleaning rooms at a travel hotel in a town about 700 miles away in rural Virginia. The only time I saw her was 16 years later at my daughter's wedding. I know the kids reconnected with Jennifer a few years after graduating from college. I made no attempt to stop them from finding her. The years have not been kind to her. She had gained at least 40 pounds and had deep wrinkles around her lips and other signs of smoking. This was a new trend. Overall, she looked old and haggard. But underneath it all, I still saw the woman I gave my heart to. I didn't feel anything for her, but I saw her. She sat alone in the bridal section near the back of the church. Her interactions with my daughter were brief, cordial, but distant. She never tried to talk to me. For the rest of the evening, we did not come closer than 10 meters to each other. She stood on the street and waited for a taxi. When I saw it on her finger, I smiled for the first time in a long time. She may have done a better job than I did, judging by the small gold ring and minuscule diamond on her left ring finger. I walked up to her and looked at him for a few moments. When I raised my eyes to meet her gaze, there was deep sadness in her gaze. For the record, first you ruined my life. I looked down at her left hand, then back into her eyes. I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you happy. I quickly walked to my car. My driver waited carefully. Good evening, Mr. Smith. Hope you had a pleasant evening, sir. Are we going to the club? It went as well as I could have hoped, Jonathan. Let's go straight back to the house. I think tonight I'd like to be alone. Of course, sir. As we drove away, I tried my best not to look back, but I caught a short wave of her hand goodbye. Michael Smith was not handsome. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about, but he was very sweet, handsome, and smart. And he was different from other guys. Our first meeting took place probably on the most terrible night of my student life. My fraternity sisters left me in the middle of a frat party to have sex with a couple of weird frat guys. They promised that we would stick together all night, but they jumped at the first chance to fool around with someone from the popular crowd. I spent 2 hours waiting for them, being harassed and groped by a bunch of drunken idiots when he finally approached me. Michael looked straight into my eyes. He politely introduced himself and made small talk for a few moments. He spoke almost in a whisper, but his eyes did not leave mine. After some time, he left. It was a pleasure talking to you, Jennifer. I'd like to invite you for coffee sometime. Here's my name and phone number if you're interested. Thanks for talking to me. This was the highlight of my semester. I admit I didn't call him. I waited a little over a week before I decided what the heck we met over a cup of coffee. He asked me all kinds of questions. I found him very easy to talk to. During the first conversation, I realized what makes him unique. Outwardly, he was quiet and unassuming. He did not look bad. Perhaps he was even a little handsome, but he was brilliant. That much was clear. He could talk on any topic and was well versed in all the questions I asked him. He said he was studying computer science, but obviously he could have chosen any other major. We started talking about my subjects, especially those with which I had problems, in particular ancient philosophy. I majored in business and advertising. Unfortunately, I put off a few of my least favorite electives and found it a little more difficult than I had hoped. Michael's eyes never left mine. Just like when we first met, he looked straight into my eyes the entire time we talked. His motive was clear. He was sincerely interested in me as a person. I was flattered. He suggested studying together in the student union or the library. So 3 days later, we were together again. I wouldn't call it studying. It would be better to call it advanced tutoring. Michael spent 3 hours in the library on Friday night, giving me the help I needed to pass my philosophy exam. When I didn't understand something, he apologized for his teaching methods and tried something different. He was so patient. He never made me feel stupid when I didn't understand something. I could sense his excitement over the phone when I called him to tell him I passed the exam last Tuesday. I could tell he was proud of me. He didn't accept any credit for the help, saying that he was actually being selfish for trying to spend time with me and that it was the most enjoyable time he'd spent on campus. I learned that Michael is not like most other guys. During the week, he was completely focused on his studies. There were no parties, absolutely no drinking, and nothing to distract him. At first it annoyed me, but it got me interested. Over the next few weeks, we didn't go on what I would call dates. But he called every day just to talk to me and see how I was doing. He left me notes to let me know he was thinking about me. We still met for coffee or in the library and once or twice had lunch together. When we were together, he kept asking questions about me, my family, my interests, my dreams. If I asked him questions, he was open and honest. One day I asked him if he was afraid of anything. This was my constant question on dates. I read somewhere in a magazine that this is a good question to understand how much a person trusts you. I was prepared for the typical answers. In the past, they've ranged from nothing to that I'll drop out of college without partying as hard as I should. Michael just sat silently for a minute, staring into space. Then he looked into my eyes and said, "I'm afraid I won't be a good father." I was an only child. My mother and father died when I was in high school, but we were never very close. Before finishing school, I lived with my uncle. He was a big womanizer, and we had very little in common. I think he was relieved when I left for college. I want to get married. I want children, but I have no experience of living in a loving, supportive family. I want to be a good father, but I'm afraid I don't know how. When he fell silent, I think he was looking for some kind of answer. "Too much?" he asked. "No, Michael, not too much, just enough." About 4 weeks into our relationship, Michael asked me if I was open on Saturday. I said yes, and he said he would stop by the sorority at lunchtime. The days leading up to that Saturday were strange. I kept asking Michael what he was planning. He didn't tell me. My sisters in my sisterhood smiled at me and whispered to me. I was on edge when he finally showed up. He was dressed in burgundy and sky blue. 3 brothers from his fraternity were dressed similarly and carried a large refrigerator and 2 huge heated trays of food. Michael had a DVD in one hand, a West Ham shirt in the other, for me, and a big smile on his face. He asked me to show him the large room of the house. As we turned the corner, most of the house was dressed in West Ham colors and started chanting. I was shocked. One day, for maybe 30 seconds, I complained about missing my family's trip to England. I had a distant cousin who was part of the West Ham Unit Club team, and my family planted a trip to London to watch him play. Unfortunately, the trip came during a very important test week for me, and I was unable to go. I was very disappointed and shared this with Michael. He asked a friend at a local sports bar to record a West Ham game from satellite. He learned the team chants, taught them to his friends and my sorority sisters, and followed the game so he knew when to start them. He and his friends brought several cases of English ale and cooked fish and chips. While the game was going on, we sang, drank, and cheered. At the 72nd minute, he silenced everyone and told me to pay attention to the screen. I was able to see my cousin score his first Premier League goal, delayed, of course. No one else in my family could repeat this. It was the nicest thing anyone has ever done for me. When it was all over, he and his friends cleaned up after themselves and hit the road. Michael said he would call me later. I was left alone to fend off teasing about the dreamy look in my eyes. It was worth it. Our phone calls, notes, and coffee continued for a couple of weeks, until one day while sipping a latte, I noticed that he seemed extremely nervous. "Is everything okay, Michael?" "What? Oh, yes, certainly. I just wanted to ask if you have any plans for Friday night. And if you're free, would you like to have dinner with me?" "Well, like a date with me on Friday. I'd love to have dinner with you, Michael." The look of relief on his face was amazing. It quickly gave way to one of the biggest smiles I've ever seen. It was on his face as he finished his coffee as we walked out the door, and as he turned to give me one last wave as he walked to class. I could see it almost a block away. From that moment on, everything became a perfect whirlwind of love, romance, and friendship. I did better at school than ever. I had more fun than I ever had in my life. People treated me differently, too. I was more comfortable being myself, the woman Michael loved. And I think people were attracted to that. I will say that being around Michael was like getting a daily ego vitamin. He may have always underestimated himself, but he was never shy about describing me in glowing terms. In fact, it was probably just the opposite. Michael was a fairly nice guy who was fit, if not a little athletic. He was always well-groomed, bordering on stylish. He was pleasant to talk to and popular, but was a little shy with new people. I can say without a doubt that he was always the smartest person in the room, including the professors, and everyone knew it. But with a laid-back demeanor, he avoided the spotlight to spend time with me. He often told me that he was an ordinary guy who won the lottery when he met me. I would describe myself as pretty. My friends described me as pretty. My family described me as cute. I've always been a little self-conscious about my appearance and my body. It was hard not to. Some of my sorority sisters were gorgeous with model looks and bikini bodies to match. But it was hard not to feel like I had something special, looking at myself through Michael's eyes. I can say that the longer I was with Michael, the more valuable I felt. I was over the moon when it was time for graduation. One of the stupid end-of-the-year rituals in sororities was playing at being a potential husband, being one of the few sisters who didn't have a long-term boyfriend. I could never be a part of it. For a large group of graduates, this was a favorite event, and it always attracted many guests. Everything was quite simple. Each sister alone spoke to the assembled graduates and could give a positive or negative example of the other sister's boyfriend during the previous year. The winner was the sister whose boyfriend received the most positive feedback. I can't say I was completely shocked by the result, but I was a little shocked. For the first time in the 29-year history of this event, my Michael received all positive reviews, one from each sister. I had never felt so proud and was a little disappointed that, as per tradition, I would not be able to tell him about his victory. 3 days later, I finally found a way to reward him. The day after graduation, Michael drove me home. I was from Chicago, and Michael was offered a job there. We spent 4 hours on the road holding hands and talking. We stopped for a quick breakfast and a kiss. We arrived at my childhood home just before lunch. Michael spent the next 2 hours charming my parents. I was a little surprised when he asked if he could buy my dad a beer. They left before I could protest. My mother smiled through misty eyes. "Oh, Jennifer, this one is a keeper. Trust me, Mom, I know." Michael and Dad smiled and laughed all the way to the front door when they finally returned 2 hours later. Michael told me he would come back for dinner after he checked into the hotel, said a quick goodbye to my parents, and left. Finally, he told me that he asked my father for permission to marry me. I will never forget that evening. It was magical. After a wonderful romantic Italian dinner, Michael proposed to me on the sky deck of Willis Tower. It was a beautiful, clear evening, and the lights of the Chicago skyline almost matched the glow in my heart. When I was in college, being a virgin was always a source of mild embarrassment. I'm sure I was the only virgin left in the house, but that night it was a precious gift, part of a matching kit. Michael gave himself to me that night. I felt it. He treasured my virginity as only he could. He was patient, loving, and gentle. He created a magnificent wave of love and lust and then carried me along with him. I couldn't even dream of a more perfect sexual contact, especially for the first time. I knew that Michael was also a virgin, with very little experience with the opposite sex. I asked where he learned to be such a fantastic lover, as modest as ever. He whispered to me, "I am reading so many. Our life was almost perfect." Michael got a good job right after graduating from university. He was constantly promoted, and I was happier than ever. I don't want to say that these years diminished their significance for me. I can't find words to express how happy I was during our first decade of marriage. It would be completely inadequate for me to describe how having children ended my life. I do not tell the details of those years because they have nothing to do with my fall. In fact, if I tell you about these years, it will only confuse you as to the motives that led to my downfall. I know my mistake. No, it's better to say that I was mistaken. I know why I fell. I didn't trust Michael enough. One of the things I loved most about Michael was that he never hid his vulnerability from me. He shared with me his entire being, almost the most important thing, his insecurities. He never hid from me. For a long time, I had nothing to hide. My life was a fairy tale. My family was wonderful. Michael never treated me as anything other than a full partner. I was involved in every decision that affected our lives. It didn't matter that he made 5 times more than me or was better at managing our finances. He always turned to me for advice and agreement. Mostly it made me feel special, but sometimes it made me feel inadequate, like I wasn't keeping up my end of the deal. I never shared this with Michael. If I had shared, I would never have ruined my life. He would help me. I know it. He loved me so much he would help me feel whole. This little insecurity grew and grew over the years. Maybe it has festered. Anyway, by the time the kids went to school, I was lost in my own skin. I felt like I needed something different that would give me an independent purpose. I wasn't looking for a lover under any circumstances. I loved my husband. In the bedroom, I was more than satisfied. Our sex life was passionate. Although perhaps a little drawn out, it was mostly my fault. I knew my husband wanted to be a little more experimental, is probably the best word. But I just decided, why ruin a good thing? No, I wanted to feel equal, not just to be treated as an equal. So I found a job and announced that I was taking it. I had everything thought out. I was fully prepared to stand up for my reasons for wanting the job. Our argument lasted 4 seconds. "I think that sounds great, Jennifer, whatever makes you happy." And it worked. I solved my problem all by myself. I didn't need help. The sheer vanity of my thoughts in those first few months made me sick afterwards. But at the time, it was exciting. I felt like an independent, confident woman capable of fighting the world. The mood in our office could be described as flirting. At worst, it could be called a den of debauchery. My colleagues, both men and women, were young, bold, and energetic. There were several official affairs between employees. To an outside observer, their sexuality seemed to give them strength. There was no relationship, just sex for sex's sake. No one hid it or thought there was anything bad about it. My boss was probably the worst of them all. Alan Henderson was a pretty nice guy, although not exactly my type. People always made fun of saying that he couldn't keep a girl and congratulating him on his latest conquest. I didn't didn't jump into bed with the first guy who hit on me. In fact, I blew him off hard. But it made me wonder if Michael and I were missing something in our sex life. Our group of friends were pretty reserved when it came to sex. There was no conversation in our area that even came close to the daily barrage I heard in the office. After our first Christmas party as a group, when I introduced Alan to Michael, my life changed forever. I could tell they didn't like each other, even though they pretended to get along great. I stopped talking to Michael about my work and never mentioned Alan. I could tell my job and boss were bothering him. After that night, I noticed that everything had changed in the office. Alan started paying me a lot of attention, praising my work in front of people and asking how I was doing. He began to ask me to share lunch with him. We always discussed our latest project for a long time. He began to ask my opinion more and more often. Then he would ask a few personal questions, and we would end the conversation and get back to work. He also started complimenting me on my appearance, using words like sexy and provocative. Looking back, I can say that he worked on me for months, and I, like a fool, consumed him. I don't remember the exact sequence of events that led to me being half naked and Alan having sex with me on his desk after everyone else had gone home. It is with deepest sorrow that I admit that I enjoyed every minute. Alan's skillful seduction left me feeling desirable, emotions that I thought were long gone. Years later, as I analyzed my behavior, I realized the full extent of my betrayal. I didn't feel like Michael wanted me because I didn't give him anything to want. I knew what kind of person he was. He would never do anything to make me feel uncomfortable. I was his true partner and cherished Ed lover, not his fuck buddy. But he was very insightful. The slightest hint from me would be enough. Any hint that I wanted something different would have drastic consequences. A painful analysis of my married life showed that Michael was clearly cautiously probing for any opportunity to intensify our sex life, and I was ignoring him. I'm terribly ashamed to admit that I did all this and more for Alan. I was his toy, and I liked it. I was too deep into my relationship with Alan before I realized the truth. He treated me the way I deserved. He treated me the way I deserved. It was painful. The contrast with Michael was striking and changed my thinking almost immediately. Alan didn't love me, and I was making a terrible mistake. I told Alan that our romance was over the next day. He laughed at me and pushed me out of his office. The package was on my desk when I returned from lunch, along with a note to be at Alan's office at 5:30 p.m. The contents of the package guaranteed my execution. The pictures of Alan with me in various positions during sex kept me glued to him and the hell that my life would become for the next year and a half and beyond. Having sex with my two coworkers who were waiting for me in Alan's office felt good compared to the other things I was forced to do during those 18 months. Let me just say that I was the company's toy and Alan was my boss, and I hated him almost as much as I hated myself. I found the solution that had eluded me for so long: courage. I told Alan, I've had enough. I don't care who he shows the photos to. He just laughed and it was over. I felt so stupid. I must say that when I woke up from my nightmare, I was surprised by the state of our house. Michael and the kids seemed to get along just fine without me. Deep down, I thought they would struggle when they were forced to face the kind of neglect I had forced upon them. But everything was exactly the opposite. It seemed like I wasn't needed at all. Michael clearly remained on top of his game. He had a new car, new clothes, and he looked like a completely successful leader. I felt terrible when I realized how long I had ignored my family. I decided that right now I would dedicate my life to them and do everything possible to make amends for my betrayal. But a distance arose between us that did not exist before. I often wondered how long it lasted. Michael never raised his voice to me. We never quarreled, but he treated me like an uninvited guest. I decided that I needed to take full action. I tried to seduce him, sexy lingerie, hints. Nothing helped. He barely touched me. A few months later, I looked at the state of our marriage. No sex life, no intimacy, no communication. I decided that I couldn't live like this. I suggested marriage counseling. Then Michael stopped talking to me. I don't just mean that he didn't trust me. He just stopped talking. Not a word for weeks. I was on edge when my birthday came. I allowed myself to feel a little nervous. After all, he couldn't ignore me on my birthday. God, how wrong I was. I came home from work, ready to see what my family had planned, only to find the house empty. Only a small wrapped box on the dining table was the only thing in its place. I knew what it was even before I opened it. A few years earlier, I forgot Michael's birthday. In a panic, I found an inexpensive watch in a store on the next street. I intended to correct my mistake later, but I never got my act together and eventually forgot about it. My gift was a mistake, but his gift was calculated. By the time I went to bed, I was furious. Keeping my kids away from me on my birthday was just cruel. I couldn't believe he could do this to me and a gift. This is already crossing all boundaries. I should have realized that something was terribly wrong. The symbolism should have been enough. Michael was not an evil person. He was the most gentle, caring, and loving person I have ever met. If I hadn't been so clouded with anger over that damn gift, I could have saved my marriage. If I had confessed my sins and asked for forgiveness, perhaps there would have been hope. Unfortunately, at that moment, I stopped thinking about working on my marriage and started thinking about divorce. I was sad, but I was determined. It took me several weeks to work out all the details with a lawyer. I told her about how Michael was distant and even cruel, how he kept the kids away from me, how he ignored my request to go to counseling, how he stopped talking to me. My lawyer attacked my comments. She said I would be well compensated. We have reviewed the claim. I felt like I was doing what was fair, but also standing up for what I needed to live a normal life. All that remained was to deliver the bad news. I stood silently in the doorway of the office and looked at the man who had once been my husband, my soulmate. He looked like the same person, but it wasn't him. Finally, I've had enough. Michael, I want a divorce. There was a long silence, but I did not see any emotion on his face. It seemed to me that he smiled, but most likely he was just in shock. He must have been shocked, because his reaction was not what I expected. No shouting, no questions. Fine, that's all. The following Friday, he was served with my divorce petition. This weekend, Michael was in a better mood, but if he tried to make amends, it was already too late. I was not in the mood for reconciliation. He even said goodbye to me at the door when I left for work on Monday morning. Too little, too late, I thought. When I arrived at the office, I realized that there was a big problem, but I had no idea what it was. My boss, the president of our company, and our corporate lawyer were arguing in the conference room. Fists stuffed with papers were waved around. I was so busy watching the hysteria that I did not notice the man who was waiting for me near my workplace. He scared me when he spoke. Jennifer Smith? Yes, you've been served. The man handed me a massive envelope, took a photo of me, and left. I didn't even have a chance to sit down, let alone look at the contents of the envelope. As soon as the man left, a security guard and an HR manager stood in front of me. Mrs. Smith, you have been suspended pending an investigation into allegations of inappropriate behavior in the workplace. Please gather your personal belongings and leave the building, she said. It was humiliating to pack my things while my colleagues looked on. It was even worse when I was escorted out of the building. I had no idea what was going on. I'd barely left the parking lot when my phone rang. It was my lawyer. I didn't even have time to say hello before she started scolding me. Hide important information and make her look like an idiot were the only phrases that made sense. I drove home in silence. The house was empty again when I arrived. I had no idea what hell I had unleashed until I finally calmed down enough to remember the envelope. Michael's counterpetition was devastating. Almost all of my extramarital affairs were documented. There was no money. He spent almost all of our savings. What struck me most was the word adultery. I thought my life couldn't get any worse. Then I tried to call my parents. I needed support. My father called me an idiot and hung up on me. He didn't need to tell me why he thought that way. I knew. The next 7 days were the loneliest days of my life, but years from now I will remember them fondly as good days. Michael left a note, which I found later, saying that he had taken the kids camping and would be back on Sunday. That first evening, my oldest friend Rebecca called around 7 o'clock to check on me. She told me that Michael had sent her the DVD and that I didn't want to know what was on it. Over the next few days, my lawyer described in detail the hopelessness of my situation. I was fired for work misconduct, and a lawsuit was filed against my company, several of the company's clients, and all of my sexual partners. I will lose custody of my children. I will lose everything. At that moment, I was ready to do anything if only Michael would stop all the litigation. I tried to prepare for his return. Unfortunately, I couldn't stop crying. When my family returned home, I was a complete mess. The children walked past me as if I was not in the room. Michael walked in a few minutes later, beer in hand, looking like he didn't care. I could barely bring myself to speak. "You will destroy me." The pure hatred in his voice destroyed me. God, I hope so. At that moment, I didn't even talk to him. I was just thinking out loud. But Michael launched it into a tirade that lasted several minutes. Every word tore me apart. I was killed, then he got up and left the room. I can honestly say that I didn't give up. I tried to reconnect with Michael, but he didn't want to talk to me. I wondered how Michael and the kids were coping without money, but everything seemed to be okay. Sometimes I would secretly watch him drop them off or pick them up from school. I couldn't find a job and received unemployment benefits. My parents didn't want to talk to me. I needed somewhere to live, so I started moving from one to another, mostly divorced men. Nobody wanted to leave me around for long. One day, everything was fine, and the next they wanted me to leave. On the advice of a lawyer, I started seeing a psychotherapist. She believed that if I repented of my behavior and tried to get professional help on my own, it would help me in court. I had very little hope. I managed to work through some points, most of which I shared with you. But the best advice from my therapist came towards the end of our session. She advised us to run far, far away. I don't know why the realization that he knew about my willing betrayal was so much worse. But that's how it was. I cried strongly. At that time, I was living with a friend of a friend, a decent guy named Robert. I think he had plans to make our relationship more than just neighbors. When he came into the room to find out what happened, I realized that he had been drinking. When he saw the package, he was furious and walked out the door before I could stop him. I became concerned when, a few hours later, Robert wasn't home. I should have. The nurses at the hospital were tight-lipped on details, but knew most of the story. Obviously, Robert came into conflict with Michael. Michael almost beat him to death. His face was disfigured. He suffered a concussion, several internal injuries, and a shattered left femur. I was terrified. My problems were now infecting the people around me. At the next session, I told this story to my therapist. She started asking me questions about Michael. I told her everything I knew. He was an only child and had no family. He was orphaned as a teenager. I talked about our young love, about his devotion to me and the children. I told him about his actions for 2 years when he should have known about my infidelity and subsequent behavior. And I told her what Michael did to Robert. When I finished, she looked scared. "You must run away from here as far as possible. Leave him alone. Don't call him. Don't write to him. Don't let him know where you are. There is no hope for reconciliation. Don't even try. Move on with your life. If you push him, the most likely result will be that he will kill you. Your actions clearly broke a person with a fragile mind. All his life he suffered disappointment after disappointment. He will never forgive you. He will never forget. Run." And I ran away. I ran away from the memories of my perfect life to a shitty college town in Virginia where I found an even shittier job. A few years later, I found a man who could tolerate me and ignore my past. The best thing I can say about it is that it didn't stink or hit me. There was no love between us, only friendship. I'm sure this was part of my punishment. My kids reached out to me as they got older just to say hello and let me know they were alive and knew I was too. They never asked to see me or play any significant role in their lives. Michael? Well, he thrived without me. I followed his news as best I could. He was always a superstar in the software industry, and he had a huge fortune to prove it. Nothing special was written about his personal life. I saw him one more time at my daughter's wedding. I was surprised that I was invited. He looked fantastic. He looked like the man who owned my heart and whom I betrayed. I admit I was a little scared when he approached me for one last gloat. "For the record, you ruined my life first." He stared at my measly wedding ring. At that moment, I regretted putting it on my finger. "I'm glad you found someone. I hope he makes you be happy." And then he left. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you. And go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.